Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as yet two more examples of our weakness outside the EU are exposed, I'd like to discuss not only the way we're going to have to mitigate the damage of these latest Brexit failings, but what MPs had to say about the subject of rejoining the EU in Parliament yesterday in a debate which lasted for several hours. It's also a debate which Reform UK didn't bother turning up for. It's interesting. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So before I get on to some of the points in the debate, what are the latest two examples of Brexit failures? Well, the first is the news that the government are thinking of pulling the plug on a Tory scheme to manage Brexit red tape. You know that most advanced border system in the world that Jacob Rees-Mogg kept talking about? Well, years after Brexit, we still don't have it. And Labour are thinking of finally calling time on it, decide, look, it's never going to work. It's costing hundreds of millions of pounds. Let's try something else. But of course, if we were inside the most advanced trading bloc in the world, we wouldn't need a system to help manage the 2 billion extra bits of paperwork that leaving the EU has generated so far. The second weakness is the lack of automatic inclusion into the EU's defence procurement scheme. The UK has an advanced defence industry, and it makes sense to incorporate it into Europe's plans to replace American military equipment and personnel on the continent. But the procurement funding is exclusively for EU members plus any third countries who join the scheme, opening the way, of course, for the UK to join. But in order to do so, we're going to have to negotiate access. More red tape, more bureaucracy caused by Brexit. If we don't, our own defence industry misses out, meaning British jobs losing out, and it means Europe loses out on one of the most advanced producers of defence equipment as well. Only Putin wins in that outcome. David Frost, the never elected former Brexit minister, was complaining, oh, but we'd have to pay to join the scheme. Well, obviously. We've been paying ever since we left the EU. The costs of Brexit have already exceeded all the membership fees we ever paid in decades of being part of the most advanced trading group of nations in the world. And these were just two new weaknesses of Brexit being exposed in the last week. We're constantly being given more examples. You know, they didn't all just tumble out when we left the EU. They're coming out all the time. My main channel playlist for just this aspect of Brexit, I've got multiple Brexit playlists, has 200 videos alone. And yesterday, MPs were debating these issues. Interestingly, not a single Reform UK MP turned up. Funny that. They jumped on the bandwagon of Elon Musk's grooming gang's conspiracy theory at the start of the year, didn't turn up to the debate on it. They don't turn up to debates on immigration. They don't turn up to debates on anything they claim to care about. Now they're not even turning up to debates on Brexit. The debate was initially led by, there was no overall lead, but it was initially led by Labour MP Paul Davies. Now, Davies is not a minister. A minister did pop up towards the end. He is very much in favour of joining the EU and said so very explicitly, but he did also act to sort of represent the government's views on it. Obviously, the official government position right now is we will not be joining the EU. But there were three reasons given, which are consistent with what they've sort of said in the past. The first is that we would be ceding some sovereignty back to Brussels, which would not sit well with some people. However, I would respond by asking, so what have we done with this sovereignty since supposedly regaining it? Our Brexit sovereignty is a white elephant. Hasn't actually come in useful for anything. In theory, yes, we can now determine our own standards for producers in Britain. However, given that the vast majority need their products to be saleable in the EU, those producers still follow EU standards anyway. So am I saying there's no difference at all? No, there actually is a big difference. Businesses in the UK used to adopt EU standards, and then that was basically it. Now they adopt EU standards and have to spend money coughing up the paperwork to prove it because there's no legal compulsion for it. So we're still complying with EU rules, but we now have to pay extra for the privilege of proving it. So tell me how we've benefited from the sovereignty return since Brexit. You can't even say, oh, well, we'll be getting the same tariffs as the EU. First of all, we don't know that. Second of all, yes, we may actually look like doing a deal with the US to have lower tariffs than the EU. However, it would be worth more to us if we had that free trade with the EU and took Trump's full tariffs. He's actually going to cost us less than we've cost ourselves by cutting off a lot of access to the single market. So tell me one way in which we have actually benefited which is provably real. Second argument was the cost of membership. Now, I've actually not heard this line being pushed too much. It's an easy debunk. The cost to the Treasury being outside the EU is nearly 3 times as much as our membership fees would be. And that's just the cost to the public purse. The cost to individual communities around the country who used to receive EU funding has hit some of the most deprived parts of Britain. The Tory government promised to provide the same funding from the membership fees, did not. A Lib Dem MP, Jamie Stone, pointed this out and expressed a hope early on that the Labour government would do so. But the easiest way to get that back is to join the EU. And it also affects others as well, people who struggle to export to the EU or import from the EU. Those businesses struggle, that hits jobs, it hits pay, it hits profits, it hits more tax revenues. So this second argument is just instantly bogus. It's not even a hypothetical argument. Some of the arguments are hypothetical and still quite easy to debunk. This isn't even hypothetical. The GDP and tax revenues lost far exceed the costs of membership. Third argument was one that Labour have consistently made for years now and is in line with the message I'm getting from people canvassing the public for Labour. It's easily the most valid argument. It's not a clinching argument. It's just one that says, yeah, we need to do this slowly. And Davis expressed this fear that a lot in Labour have, that another EU membership debate reopens divisions in society, which we saw during the Brexit years of like 2016 to 2020 in particular. Davis talked about the risk of political instability. Now, as I've said before, this argument is consistent. It is valid. Much of Labour's strategy does help deal with it. They're attempting to lower trade barriers as much as possible within the current red lines. Now, if that is successful, they obviously are not going to stop there. That makes no sense. So if it's successful and if it can be achieved reasonably quickly, then we need to hammer home the instant benefits of doing so. Use that argument to rub out the easiest red line, as I've discussed recently, customs union next. Next year is going to be huge. We have the talks on the trade and cooperation agreement. Despite the EU making noises last year about, we just want to continue it. I said at the time, absolute rubbish. It was the EU who decided we should have this sort of reflection period after we would definitely have had a general election. The EU expected there to be a change of heart after the next election, and they put it in deliberately. But it's not what they're saying these days. That's what matters. Both sides are openly saying they want major changes. Germany's wondering if we maybe should use the talks to discuss customs union. That is the low-hanging fruit. If we are to go further than Labour's current plans, if we were to say, look, the situation is we need to go faster and further. Reeves cannot keep tightening her budget as Trump runs amok. We're going to need to do something more positive. Closer trade with the EU is the obvious way to do it. And this point about opening old Brexit divisions in society doesn't stop us massively improving our trade arrangements with the EU. It just means we pursue boring methods first. The customs union is very boring. The debate itself mostly took the form of MPs arguing in favour of either much closer relationships with the EU or full membership. It's interesting so few Brexit supporters took part. Now, why would that be? Because they're confident that Brexit's secure, so they didn't need to turn up? In which case, why are they always wailing about how it's been attacked in the media? Or is it that they can't think of any Brexit defences to bring to the table? Jim Shannon of the DUP, he was the first of the pro-Brexit MPs to speak. He explained in the debate, yes, I supported Brexit, but he complained that we did not get the Brexit that they voted for. But that allowed Tim Rock of Labour to counter by saying, well, Shannon's you just proved my point. And it's a point many anti-Brexit commentators have made. Those who supported Brexit are not happy with Brexit because Brexit meant different things to different people. That Brexit was an illusion, he said. And it's a point we should keep coming back to. The vote was very tight. Everyone who voted to remain all voted for exactly the same thing as each other, because that was fairly straightforward. People who voted to leave voted for different things to one another. So there was no majority and never was a majority in favour of any particular form of Brexit. What Brexit did was create a sort of coalition of people who wanted various things that might have emerged from Brexit, but were not consistent with each other's vision of it. So in terms of actual Brexit majorities, the only majority Brexit did create was a clear majority of the public who do not approve of Brexit. In which case, and given that no Brexit will satisfy the majority, even if that same majority were still alive today, why do we persist? Another Brexiteer who stood up, also from Northern Ireland, was Jim Allister. But he also just exposed how ridiculous and unpopular Brexit is, because he began making a point by whining. He said, well, this isn't really a debate, is it? It's not a debate. This is just an echo chamber of people standing up. And I think he called it a loving. You know, it was just going on about it being an echo chamber because MP after MP was standing up saying how we should join the EU. And he thought he was making a clever point here. But the debate was open to everyone. It just so happens that almost everyone who attended wants us to join the EU. What does that tell him? During the 3-hour debate, only 3 MPs spoke up for Brexit. There wasn't a queue of pro-Brexit MPs being frozen out. They just weren't there. They didn't exist. And the only Tory Brexiteer who spoke couldn't help tell lies either. They were unable to defend Brexit at all, couldn't come up with a single benefit. They fell back on the argument, and I quote, "The verdict issued by the British public on that day was a final and binding decision backed up with a confirmatory vote in 2019. It was not, of course, legally a final or binding decision. In fact, the legislation passed for the referendum made clear, as did the ballot papers, made clear that it was not a binding vote. And of course, no vote is ever final. That's why we keep having elections. It's also not true that there was a confirmatory vote in 2019. There was a general election where a party, as always, with the largest minority of the votes, won 100% of the power. And even then, did not implement the Brexit they promised in their manifesto. What that debate did was expose just how there's nothing left in the tank for Brexit. The Conservatives had to send someone, but they were unable to send anyone who could defend the policy on any grounds. They just blamed the public, millions of whom are now dead. The only 2 who chose to take part for Team Brexit were from Northern Ireland. No other Tories could be bothered. No MPs from Reform UK either. You listen to that debate, or just read it on Hansard as I did, because who wants to listen to MPs gassing on for 3 hours? And it's clear that Parliament overwhelmingly wants to be in the EU. And this is no disconnect between a Westminster bubble and the public, because polling shows that way more of the public support the idea than are opposed. And this isn't me saying, my conclusion isn't, so therefore we should join the EU because the Brexit MPs can't even come up with a single argument. Now, I'm going to put it differently. That debate didn't show that we should join the EU. It showed that we're going to join the EU. It's inevitable. The political will is overwhelmingly in favour. Any MP was allowed to turn up to that debate and say whatever they liked. Three pro-Brexit MPs, and none of them came up with a Brexit benefit, not even a bogus one. There are more urgent fires to put out as far as a lot of politicians are concerned. There is that genuine fear of stoking divisions when politics is already in the doghouse. That cannot be underplayed. People already mistrust politics. So the idea of a government stoking something that's going to basically create another civil war again is mad. But as things improve, that argument will die down. And in the meantime, it's not like we're standing still and waiting for it to die down. In the meantime, we are trying to forge those closer relationships with the EU as well. We are going to rejoin. It's just a matter of when. And also how red Alistair's face turns when we do. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll see you later.